So
good.
Now you should be able to see. Okay, so let's talk 15 minutes about climate change. And of course, this is not news for anyone in the audience. These are a couple of recent graphs from IPCC report. So you can see observations and also projections on surface air temperature, sea surface temperature. So we have observed and we are expecting global increases in temperatures, sea level rise, decreases in permafrost, snow and ice covers. And in the Arctic regions, we are expecting to see even amplified changes during the next decade. So here is a map of Arctic with some borders there. For example, Reindeer region there. And we are, of course, mostly interested in this part here, so reindeer management region in Nordic countries. And there you can also see the reindeer management area of Finland, which Jouko already presented. So we are talking about quite long distances from open fields here to more boreal regions here. So the climatic impacts are, of course, different. So why are we interested in climate studies as reindeer researchers? Of course, it's well known that seasonal weather events and the quality of the herding environment and pastures, they determine how well the reindeer are doing and how successful reindeer husbandry as a livelihood is. So that's the basis of everything. And we know that reindeer are very adaptable and also the livelihood, but still there are climate vulnerabilities and risks involved. And what is interesting from my perspective is the seasonality. So when we are talking about climate change, it's easier if we try to translate it to seasonal weather and how that might change. Here is one example how Northern people have understood the annual cycle. So there are more than 4 seasons there. And this sketch here tries to show what is happening in the seasons and then what is happening in the reindeer pasture use, reindeer life cycle, and then reindeer husbandry cycle or annual rhythm. So if we study changing climate, it's very useful to consider one season at a time, for example. And then about effects. Of course, we are starting from here. So primary effects, how weather conditions are changing. And then we are talking about changes in the mean, but also changes in the extreme events. And these extreme events might be more interesting because they are perhaps the most harmful ones. For example, past year, which has been very good example what happens when things are very extreme. Then there are secondary, perhaps more slow effects, which many of you are interested, what happens on pastures, what happens with new diseases or parasites, and so on. And then there are even more slow changes in culture and perhaps even in language, and changes because of adaptation actions, when you need to modify your herding practices, for example. So we are actually talking about changes along what we call value chain of reindeer husbandry. So we start from the animal and pastures, but then there are so many things along the path. There are reindeer herding cultures, for example, meat processing, transportation things, services, and so on. And I have a feeling that climate change has been already studied a lot, but then adaptation actions are studied a little bit less. And this knowledge we already have should be exploited better because, for example, herders and also governance and guidance and education of reindeer husbandry perhaps knows how to cope with the difficult conditions, but then if you are asking about more long-term adaptation planning, then perhaps the knowledge is not used as much as it could be used. And then there are another interesting questions. We as reindeer researchers, we want to discuss with herders. We want to collect local knowledge. We want to collect practitioners' insights, but then we need to consider why and what to do with this and how to combine it with scientific knowledge. There are, for example, questions: are we validating something? Are we validating herders' understanding or scientific observations? And is it actually useful? There is one good paper from Abu et al. About two-eyed seeing. And the idea is that we are looking at the same issue, same phenomena, but from two different directions. And perhaps this way we get a better understanding, and this understanding might help when planning the adaptation. And one more citation from IPCC, they are saying that we really need to learn how to relate these different kinds of knowledges because we need better solutions for the future. So I'm giving two examples how we have used local knowledge. So this is not really like using participatory methods through workshops or something like that, more collecting the information from herding districts. So we wanted to study a bit more how seasonal weather has changed in Finland, reindeer management region. So we made a survey questionnaire and asked about changes during past 30 years. And this was distributed to all herding districts in Finland. Then we talked with the Finnish Meteorological Institute and asked them to draw maps and a time series. You can see there is a time slot. So it's a little bit different time slot. It's not the past 30 years. We are actually missing one 10-year period there. But we were thinking about the standard period and indices which were related to temperature, precipitation, and snow, but they were more illustrative than, for example, winter mean temperature. So we were talking, for example, about number of hot days during summer or number of liquid precipitation days during snow period. Example how the meteorological data looks like. This is about number of zero crossing days. So days when temperature is both above and below zero. So the map shows you that when the data has enough spatial resolution, you can actually compare the districts. And this is very useful when discussing with herders, so they can compare their situation with neighbor situation, for example. And then annual time series allow comparing certain winters, for example, when this phenomena was not seen, and some winters when it was very common. So then you can also think how this impacts your work. About survey results, we got 90 answers. This is only one example about the summer arguments. So this survey had arguments, and then herders answered that yes, they agree or don't agree. And well, I said that we shouldn't compare, but of course we did comparison to meteorological observations, and these observations were very much in line. Also, we could see some regional differences. So some changes had been observed in some regions and some were not. But also there were some agreements and disagreements inside a region. So that was interesting. And this summer shows also one problem, because herders had really experienced increased precipitation, heavy rainfalls, even though this wasn't seen in the meteorological data, perhaps because there had been so rainy summers just before the survey. Here you can see couple of open answers. So most interesting for me was to read these open answers, how things have changed and how it has affected the herding. So to conclude from here, it's clear that this kind of changes, which you see here, have been experienced, and they are also expected in the future. So that's something people need to adapt to. And about knowledge gaps, when discussing with herders or reading their texts, it's clear that there are certain weather and climate related phenomena which are very important and they are expected to change, but we don't know very much about them. So there are no observational networks and we don't know how to forecast them. For example, formation of ice layers in the snow cover, it's not very well known, or mold below the snow cover, or mushroom yield or insect harassment. And these are something we should work on. That's my opinion. Then very shortly, in Finland, we have annual management reports of reindeer herding districts, and they are easily found this year forward. And we were interested in basal ice formation on the pastures. So we did a lot of reading of these reports and listed when and where this basal ice was experienced during the winters. So this makes quite a nice data set of annual extent of icing. So I'm showing one figure here, and here you can see exceptionally extensive icing winters, and then rarely extensive, and then 80 percentile extensive. So you can see that this icing has been experienced, of course, all through this period, but it has perhaps been more common during the past couple of decades. So these very extensive ice formation years have been experienced lately. And this is something I'm very interested in, and I'm glad to discuss about ice layer formation also with you. Here are a couple of examples. These are citations from the annual management reports. Some are old, some are more new. This is from northern part, and these are from central part of the reindeer management region. So you can read them now or later. So some lessons learned from our work. We have found this kind of multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary work very useful. If we come only from natural science perspective, it's sometimes difficult to understand what do these findings mean, or vice versa. Sometimes it's easily forgotten that actually there is nature and climate behind almost everything we do. And then transdisciplinary work, which is more difficult. So really trying to create new knowledge with the herders, other land users, policymakers, and all that. So I have learned to really acknowledge that there is relevant knowledge with practitioners, and that can be found, for example, in archives or using interviews, surveys, workshops. And yeah, I think there is a lot to learn. Like Tim said, I'm agreeing with Tim that how to do this efficiently and nicely, and so that it's useful for all parties. That's something we need to learn. About using natural science data, it's worth trying to use human scale, like temporal scale and spatial scale, so that it's easily understood what we mean when we are, for example, talking about warming summers or something like that. And yeah, we have found it more easy to talk about seasonal weather, not necessarily climate, and perhaps coping measures, coping strategies, not adaptation. Of course, they are different things, but perhaps it's easier to have the dialogue when using that kind of words. So there are a couple of recent. Okay, thank you. A couple of recent or ongoing projects about these themes. So there is Klimini, which we have just started, about adaptation of reindeer management in Finland to climate change. Then Nordic Center of Excellence RAIN. I see many familiar faces from RAIN in this group. Then we have been starting a big EU project called Charter and IROS. And that's not our project, but it's very interesting, from Oulu University, climate change adaptation of Sami people. And reindeer husbandry had a big role in that project. So please go and check if you are interested. And a couple of recent papers about these themes. And thank you, but I have one extra slide here about the past winter we already discussed in one of the breakout rooms. I think it's very illustrative example. Here you can see, this is Jyväskylä, where I am now, mid-Finland. So mean snow conditions, and here is mean snow conditions in northern places, mid-Lapland, NKJ, very far north. And you can see we didn't have last winter almost any snow, but the northern locations really had, and we all know what sort of winter it was for reindeer husbandry. So this will be very extreme also in the future climate. It's not going to be like that, but also a good example what to do when the conditions are really bad. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sirpa. A very interesting lecture, and thank you for meeting the